welcome to this epic debate, Achilles versus Hector. Our two debaters are, of course, Wes Callihan, who is going to be arguing that Hector is the greater hero, and Matt Bianco, who will be arguing that Achilles, or Achilles, that might be its own debate, is the greater hero. For those who follow Roman roads, you already know Wes Callihan. Most likely, he is the author of the Old Western Culture great book series that we publish, spanning the great books from Homer all the way through to the early moderns. And then and Matt Bianco is the Chief Operating Officer, is that right? COO of the Circe Institute. And Dr. Matt Bianco, recently, correct? And the Circe Institute is dedicated to the cultivation of wisdom and virtue and the renewal of classical education. And I wanted to share something real quick with you all. I promised Matt Kern I would do this. Here we go. So, let's see. Okay, yes, there we go. So this July 14th through 16th is the Circe National Conference. It is a contemplation of worlds. So Roman Roads will be doing the live stream. The in-person conference is already sold out, so sorry, too late, but you can join in through the live stream. The registration, if I understand correctly, it went live before this debate started, so you can already register for the virtual conference. And if you watched the lecture that we sent out as we were in the last two emails that showed Matt, it showed a sample lecture from last year. This is not just a webcam in the back of the room. We're bringing multiple cameras, doing a live cut feed, and so it should be not quite the fellowship and the smells and the tastes and of being there, but you will see and hear and be a part of it in a very tangible way. So make sure and register for the Circe National Conference. Whether you can, if you can't be there in person, you can be there virtually. So we are very much looking forward to that. Okay, so this is the format of this debate. I was inspired by this debate by watching Mary Beard and Boris Johnson. Mary Beard is a pretty famous author of antiquity, Roman and Greek antiquity. Boris Johnson is a known classicist and the current Prime Minister of Britain. But they had a debate of which was greater, Greece versus Rome. And it is one of the most enjoyable debates I have ever seen. It was well produced in a large auditorium for pre-COVID. And it was just a very fun time of engaging in a serious yet lighthearted way. And that's what I hope for here. Of course, it is very serious. One of them is greater, right? But at the same time, it's I hope we can't take Matt too seriously when he says he can't be friends with someone who doesn't love Achilles. So we'll have to see. Maybe not. And so the debate will be, I'm going to ask each Matt, Wes, and Matt, who is Hector and who is Achilles? And then I'm going to ask them to describe from the other perspective as well. And then we're going to give, Wes will give his argument, Matt will give his arguments, then they will each have a rebuttal period, closing statements, and then we will be polling the crowd for who the winner is. Now, this is a democracy. The winner will be determined by you. So pay attention. And I'd like to ask you I will be asking two questions. First of all, who do you think is the greater hero at the end? But also, did you change your mind from the debate? So I probably should have set it up like Matt suggested, where I actually polled you now and then checked later so we could actually verify. But honor code here, write it down. Make a note. Which do you think is greater, Hector or Achilles? And I would be very interested to see how many minds will be moved by the end of this debate. So if you don't know Roman Roads, I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Daniel Fukushon, the founder of Roman Roads Press. We produce classical curriculum for homeschools and schools. So definitely check us out if you're new to us. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and ask I'm going to give a maximum of 5 minutes for each of these segments, and some of them 3. So I am timing it. I've got my stopwatch. Oh yeah, well, come on, it's lighthearted, but we got to be a little bit serious. And so I will go ahead and start with Wes. Wes, who is?
What? Can I have a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I just want to know, like, is there going to be any sort of audience interaction?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So after the polling of the crowd, there's questions that they can be asked throughout. We have the questions opened, and I was planning to have a Q&A session afterwards. Now, did you want something in between? I'm open to beforehand. We can decide to make a little change if you want an interaction in the middle.
No, I don't. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to know if I can close the chat box so I don't have to. I don't want to be. I don't want to see all these Team Hector things, and I want to close it and not be responsible for monitoring it.
No Achilles. No, there's a few out there. No, you can close the chat box. I'm monitoring the chat, so I may bring in. I may kind of bring in a few comments during the debate from the crowd. I'll represent the crowd, so you can ignore the chat box. I'll represent the crowd. There will be an actual QA afterwards. But if there's something, well, Achilles is the GOAT. If there is something that is worthy from the crowd other than heckling, I might bring it in. Okay, so so you can close the chat. So to Wes, who is Hector?
Okay. Normally in rhetoric, the opening parts will include a declaration of things that are not in dispute. So I would have sort of assumed that would be happening here, that Matt and I would each describe who is Hector and who is Achilles in terms of the facts, and then argue later. But you've set this up so it looks to me like you expect some disagreement. So I'll go with that. But let me just try and do a factual presentation, and then Matt can certainly feel free to correct me. Hector is a noble Trojan prince, noble because he's the oldest son of King Priam of Troy. He's the leader of the Trojan army in the war with the Achaeans, what we call the Greeks in the Iliad. He has a wife, an infant son, and he is, of course, the brother of Paris, who brought Helen to Troy. And most importantly for the story of the Iliad, he is the one who kills Patroclus, the beloved friend of Achilles. Patroclus is fighting in place of Achilles since Achilles refuses to fight. Hector's killing of Patroclus brings Achilles back into the battle, and that precipitates all of the action of the last third of the book. So Hector is a very, very important figure. I can describe the role in the book as well. I'm not sure how much we are to assume that the audience knows. I'm not hearing you, Daniel.
Sorry, there we go. Hey, if our president can forget the mute button, I'll give myself a little bit of a. So go ahead and fill in a little bit. And this is, I agree, it's good if I'm hoping there will be some common ground here. So that is good on who he is. But go ahead and fill in a little bit the story. I'll give you extra time for that if you'd like, because not everyone has, unfortunately, read the Iliad, even though I hope most here have.
I don't think I need extra time. In fact, I've only taken up 2. You said I had 5 minutes. I've only taken up 2.
That's right.
His role in the story, basically, he's of course, he's the leader of the Trojan army. So he first shows up in book 2 in the famous catalog of ships. There's a lengthy catalog of the Achaean ships, and then a very short catalog of the Trojan ships at the very end of book 2. And he's mentioned there at the beginning of that catalog, just mentioned as the leader of the Trojans. And then there's other leaders of the Dardanians and of the allies of the Trojans and so on. And then he shows up again. He'll show up in the fighting once the fighting erupts in book 5, and he's mentioned. And then he has a significant role in book 6 of the Iliad, where he goes into the city and so on. I'll talk more about that later. But he simply is one of he's the leader of the Trojans, but he's only one of the warriors up until book 16, so 2/3 of the way through the 24 books of the Iliad. He's a mighty warrior. He's on the scale of Aias the big, the big brick tower of a warrior, because Hector picks up boulders the size of a VW bug and stuff like that. So he's a great warrior, but he's just one of the warriors. But in book 16, because for the first 2/3 of the story, Achilles has refused to fight due to the argument back in book 1 that everybody knows about. His friend Patroclus asks to go out and lead Achilles' army, the Myrmidons, in place of Achilles, and he does. And there he encounters Hector, who kills him. So the death of Patroclus at the hands of Hector makes Achilles come unglued, and he comes back, roaring back into the battle with murderous vengeance in his heart to take down Hector. And in the last, the last 8 books of the Iliad are primarily about Achilles going after Hector and finally encountering him in book 22, where they have a duel, and Achilles kills Hector, takes him down in front of the city. And then for the next 2 books, until late in book 24, Achilles drags Hector's dead body around the city with his weeping family on the walls of Troy looking down and seeing it. And Achilles is still enraged. He can't let go of the anger in his heart because of what Hector did to Patroclus. And finally, in book 24, King Priam comes and asks for Hector's body back, and the gods allow it, and Achilles softens and allows it, and the body of Hector is returned to Troy. And so the very last line of the entire Iliad is about Hector. Such was the burial of Hector, breaker of horses. So he shows up in the first 2/3 of the book as just one of the great warriors. In the last third of the book, he's the great opponent of Achilles. Achilles kills him, and the death of Hector kind of concludes the story. That's my read.
Thank you, Wes. Okay, there we go. I'm not muted. Thank you. That's great. So I'm going to be asking you to Matt to now explain who Achilles is, and this part of it really is supposed to be mostly undisputed. And then I will ask you to briefly explain each other's person after that. The next step is when you're going to actually say, why is he the greater hero? And there's some of the categories. Is he a better warrior, moral person, mature person, better leader, better family man, better citizen, more loved, more cool? So you can keep that part till a little, try to keep the disagreement out a little bit. But no, that was great. So over to you, Matt. Who is Achilles? And go ahead and fill in his spot in the story,
Sure.
similar to Wes did for Hector.
I will say, just right as I open up, that I do agree basically with Wes's presentation of Homer, or of Hector. He's noble, he's a leader, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a brother. The only exception that I would argue, and we can save the argument itself for later, but I reject that he killed Patroclus. But we could talk about that late when we get there. So Achilles himself is the son of Peleus and the son of the sea nymph Thetis, who is the daughter of the old man of the sea. So he's part man, part divine, and he is in the battle. He is known generally as the greatest of the Achaean warriors, as far as by his power, his might, his prowess, and he is there because the Achaeans, because of Hector's brother Paris, who kidnapped Menelaus's wife. Menelaus is the brother of Agamemnon. Agamemnon is the king of kings amongst the Greek city-states, and so Agamemnon calls upon all of the other kings, including Achilles, that they would all come to war and fight on behalf of him and his brother Menelaus to win back Helen from the dirty, rotten Trojans. And sorry, did I put too much emotion in there? So to get back the wife from Paris and the Trojans. And depending on well, it's in the text, it's at least alluded to, there was apparently some hesitancy on Achilles' part, Odysseus's part. Some of these guys didn't really want to go to war here in Troy, but they were compelled by circumstances and Agamemnon, etc. So now they're all here. They've been at war now for approaching 10 years. And during that time, as I understand it, there's not been a lot of head-to-head action between Troy itself and the Greeks themselves, the Achaeans themselves, but rather the Achaeans kind of going around and attacking the neighboring cities and villages, among which included a city where a priest of the god Apollo was serving. And in that attack, they defeated the city. They took prizes from that city, and among those prizes were two ladies, one by the name of Briseis and one by the name of Chryses. Chryses was the daughter of the priest of Apollo. She became the prize of Agamemnon. Briseis became the prize of Achilles. And then Apollo got upset the priest got upset, went to Apollo, asked Apollo for his support, and then Apollo attacked the Achaeans until Chryses was returned. So Achilles is just the Greek hero, the ultimate Greek hero, and I would argue the subject of Homer's great wartime epic, the Iliad. So he's the defender of Greek culture, its way of life, and then of Greek piety. So he acts first and foremost on behalf of that, on behalf of Greek culture, on behalf of piety toward the gods. So in fact, when Apollo is upset in this situation, he defends Apollo and defends Apollo's priest. He defends Apollo's priest, Chryses, against Agamemnon's impiety, kind of encouraging Agamemnon to return the priest's daughter to him. And then does so while maintaining himself obedience to Hera and Athena and the other gods. So he defends this Greek way of life, this life of glory and honor, against the whims of Agamemnon, as it were, who would, I think as we're reading the text, see that Agamemnon would kind of change the rules for his own aggrandizement, for his own gain. I can grant that to many of us, as we read this book, we encounter Achilles, we see him crying. Agamemnon has taken his prize. He's crying. He's praying to his mother. And in that moment, he can come across to us as a crybaby. However, as we will see, I think, as we're going forward, the initial falling out of Achilles and Agamemnon is not the result of Agamemnon's taking Achilles' prize, but rather it's the result of Agamemnon's threatening the entire Greek way of life. So Agamemnon, once he discovers that he has to return his prize to the priest, he is the one who cries that it is unfair that he has to lose his prize and no one else does. And he says that as a result of this, he's going to take somebody else's prize to replace his. Achilles then stands up, not to defend his own prize, but to defend everyone's prize, to defend everyone's award of glory and honor. In fact, going so far as to remind Agamemnon that to take back prizes once given is a thing that is not done, has not been done, and is not done among the Greeks. Ignoring Achilles' comments about the Greek way of life, Agamemnon then threatens by saying, well, I'm going to take back a prize, and it's going to be either Ajax's, Odysseus's, or yours. And again, it's Achilles who stands up against that dishonor. What? And when Achilles stands up again, that's when Agamemnon changes the threat to taking Achilles' prize, and nobody else's, but just Achilles' prize. This is the very thing that they were fighting against the Trojans for, Paris having done this to Menelaus. So it's flipped the table and done the same thing. He's doing the same thing now that Paris did to his brother. All right, sorry. Now you're muted.
There you go. Awesome. That was great. A great background to Achilles, and without too many jabs there. That was good. So we're going to try to keep this one even briefer, even more brief. So Wes, without giving all the background from the first question, how would you describe Achilles? 3 minutes.
I largely agree with Matt. He did for the most part, a fair job of describing Achilles and his role. in the interest of time, I'll simply say that, yeah, I agree with most of that. I take exception to him characterizing Achilles as the greatest Greek hero. I'm going to argue that he was not. I will argue that Odysseus is the greatest Greek hero, but I won't dispute. I won't dispute that. I will also dispute that he says Achilles is defender of the Greek way of life. No, he's not. The Greek way of life is much larger, and Achilles has very little to do with much of what comprises the Greek way of life, not just in later Greek culture, but even in Homer. He is a defender of the piety toward the gods, as other Greek heroes are. I also particularly agree with Matt that at the beginning in book one, when in the quarrel with Agamemnon, Achilles gets offended and insulted and goes off and sulks in his tent. It is my position that from book one up to book 9, Achilles is justified. I don't have a problem with his reaction. And the reason is, Matt was touching on this, I think, that when Agamemnon takes away his prize, Agamemnon is not just simply offending a great Greek warrior. Any of the other warriors that Agamemnon had done this to could have gone home and said, well, see you then, Agamemnon, I'm out of here, and gone back home. Achilles is the one about whom it has been prophesied that he will either stay home and live a long but ignoble and unknown life, or he will go to Troy and die young, but with great glory. He's made that choice. He's now in Troy. He cannot go back. He can't go back to the fork in the road. He's taken the one fork. So now he's in Troy. He's going to die young. And if Agamemnon has his way, he will now die young and without the glory that he went to Troy for. So Agamemnon has robbed Achilles of more than he could rob any other man of. And so I think Achilles is justified in his reaction, at least up to book 9. That's where things change. I also think that Achilles shows himself, and this is not a disagreement with Matt, just an addition. I think that Achilles shows himself as a great and magnanimous king, because in book 23, where he's having the funeral for Patroclus and then the funeral games, he for a moment there, especially during the funeral games, he shows himself to be a wise and compassionate and sensitive judge and friend of the people that are competing. So he's characterized by the sort of magnanimity that I'm not even sure I see in Agamemnon. So I will grant some things about Achilles' greatness, just to make Matt feel a little bit comfortable before what comes later. You're muted, Daniel.
I'm muted again. Perfect. Right into 3 minutes. Okay, so Matt, who is Hector? Again, not giving the background, but so much of who do you see him as? You describe him.
Well, agreeing with what Wes said earlier about Hector, I think that what needs to be added is that he's a self-admitted coward. In book 3, he admits that the right thing to do would have been to kill Paris and return Helen, but then says the only reason that didn't happen is because they are cowards. His words, not mine. He is a middle-of-the-road warrior compared to the Greek heroes. He's good, but he's not great. He's good compared to the Trojans. He's not good compared to the Greeks. He fights Ajax twice. The first time, Ajax basically kills him, but Apollo sweeps him away and saves his life. The second time, Ajax defeats him, but his men, Sarpedon, Aeneas, and others come and rescue him. Another time, he is told by a god to stay away from the front lines so long as Agamemnon is there. But once Agamemnon leaves, then he's allowed to go and fight on the front lines. He's a proud and arrogant ideologue. Polydamas tells him twice, once in book 12, again in book 18, not to push too far into the Greeks. But one of those times not to push too far, the other time that they should go back inside the city. He ignores this advice. The first time he says because he knows that Zeus is on his side, because he is fighting to protect his homeland. He turns the belief about protecting his homeland, probably a true one, that the gods defend those who protect their homes, into an ideology that presumes divine support of his mission. Yet we know that Zeus is not actually in support of his efforts to protect Troy. The second time he ignores Polydamas, but then in book 22, Priam tells him to return to the safety of the city. This is as Achilles is going after him, right? And he says he cannot, because then Polydamas would be able to reproach him for not having listened to the advice earlier. So his pride, his arrogance, his ideology will not allow him to do the right thing. I think some of these descriptors can clearly sound far-fetched until we see them in the text. But I think book 6 really kind of throws a monkey wrench into the mix because of that, in that scene with his wife and his son. And it's just so touching. But I think one thing that we have to acknowledge, we have to recognize as we read the text closely, is that the fear that his son sees when he sees his father in the helmet is foreshadowing who Hector is going to become. It's like the Hobbit who wears the ring for so long that he turns into a golem. The longer Hector dons that helmet, the more monstrous he becomes. In fact, just 2 books later, book 8, Homer will describe him as having eyes like the Gorgon and murderous Ares. He is becoming the monster that his son sees in that moment. The longer he wears that helmet, and that's Homer foreshadowing that for us. So he starts out really, really high because we have with us, right? Because we see this beautiful, touching scene, and what we fail to see is the collapse of Hector every moment thereafter, all foreshadowed in that first scene. Well, that book 6 scene in the city.
Exactly 3 minutes. Really well done. Okay. So because up till now everything has been just neutral facts and no tipping of the hand of what you actually think, because that's coming up, right? Wes, it is now your turn to make the case. Why is Hector the greater hero? And we can include elements of being a better warrior, a more moral person, more mature person, better leader, family man, better citizen, loved one, and you could add more categories there as you see fit. But go ahead. 5 minutes.
All right. Well, first of all, since Matt drifted from the realm of talking about undisputed facts and into obvious argumentation and contention, let me just refute a couple points he made. One of them, he refuted himself. He argues that Hector is a coward, and yet he himself said that Hector was willing to go into battle knowing that the gods are not with him. That seems kind of problematic to Matt's argument. Secondly, when he describes Hector as having the eyes of a murderous Gorgon in the context of the Iliad, that is a positive thing, not a negative thing. Achilles is described in similar terms in other places. So is Aias, so is Teucros. There are other people who are described as having murderous looks on their face, and this is not a negative thing. This describes a man who is ferocious, which for Homer is a good thing. But let Matt think on those for a moment and come back to the actual argument here. Why is Hector the greater hero? Hector is the greater hero not necessarily because he is the greater hero in Achilles' sole area of being a warrior. There is no hero in the Iliad at all. The Iliad is a tragedy. Achilles is the protagonist. He's the main figure, but the Iliad is the story of Achilles' failure, his downfall. That's the definition for the Greeks of tragedy. A tragedy is the downfall of an otherwise great man. I grant that Achilles is a great man outside of the Iliad, considered kind of out of the context of the Iliad. He's a great warrior. He is the greatest warrior in terms of fighting ability. But in the Iliad, he is a failure. Hector is a better man in the Iliad because of reasons that I want to get to in just a moment. So Achilles is the protagonist, but he's not the hero. A hero succeeds. In the Iliad, Achilles fails. He's only redeemed at the end. I think that the Homer rather intends us to see this story as to see Achilles in a way in which we sympathize with him, because with the downfall of an otherwise great man is meant to stir pity and terror in us, as Aristotle said, because if the greatest people like Achilles can fall so low, what do the rest of us mere mortals have to look forward to? But in the story of the Iliad, Achilles is not the greater man. Hector is. So I don't hold that Hector is the real hero of the Iliad, because again, there is no hero in a tragedy. But in this story, in this particular story, he is a better man all round than Achilles, and he's worthy of honor. At least he's certainly worthy of more honor than my esteemed opponent is granting him, because Hector has not lost his sanity. unlike Achilles, and perhaps my esteemed opponent. Every bad thing that Hector does in the Iliad must be seen in the light of his desperate attempt to save his city and family, something everyone can sympathize with. And the prime example is the catastrophic turn of events at the end of book 16, which Matt hasn't touched on, but those events are seen in the light of book 6, which Matt did touch on. And book 6 and book 16 are the crux of my argument here. First of all, let me talk about Achilles before I get into those two books. In the very first line of the Iliad, to back up what I was saying earlier, that the Iliad is not the story of a successful man, but a failure. The very first line of the Iliad says, sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus, the son of Achilles, and its devastation. This is the story of the wreckage caused by Achilles. Hello. Now, I said earlier that in my view, Achilles' anger is comprehensible up until book 9, because Agamemnon has done to Achilles more damage than he could have done to anyone else. I think Achilles is justified in his reaction, probably, up until book 9. I have no problem with that. But in book 9, the famous embassy to Achilles, where Odysseus and Phoenix and Aias go to Achilles' shelter, he rejects what is a very reasonable offer by Agamemnon at public restitution. Now people go, I side with Achilles, but Agamemnon didn't actually come out and say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me," and cry on Achilles' shoulder, and he didn't even go in person. But in the context of those times, a great king sends an ambassador. He doesn't go in person. That's just the way it works. And secondly, Achilles doesn't want a personal apology from Agamemnon, a heartfelt, repentant look on his face. Achilles wants public honor restored, because that's what was taken away. So Agamemnon has done this. He's offered a perfectly reasonable public restitution, and Achilles rejects it. He's now changed the terms of what he said he wanted in book 1. Agamemnon has offered in book 9 to Achilles what Achilles said in book 1 he wanted, and Achilles turns it down. In fact, the way Achilles turns down Odysseus and Phoenix and Ajax in book 9 makes it clear that nothing, literally nothing, Agamemnon could have offered would satisfy Achilles. Achilles doesn't want to hear anything at all. He wants the Achaeans to go on suffering for a while. There's nothing Agamemnon can do. That's not what Achilles said he wanted in book 1. All right, now, so secondly, or thirdly, maybe, in book 16, Achilles, because he's stayed out of the battle, at the beginning of book 16, Patroclus, his beloved friend, comes and he says, "Let me lead the Myrmidons in your place, since you won't go and fight, and our people are dying because you won't go and fight. Let me lead the Myrmidons in place and wear your armor." Now, this is actually a suggestion of Nestor back in book 11. But Patroclus comes and he says this to Achilles at the beginning of book 16, and Achilles says, "Okay, you can do it." And then Achilles does an utterly irrational thing. He says, "When you have driven the Trojans out of the camp, out through the gates and out on the plain, stop and come back." And we know that later in book 16, Patroclus disobeys that. He presses the Trojans all the way to the city, and that's why he dies. But let me explain why I think Achilles' command to Patroclus is completely irrational. What sane, well-trained warrior in any army in the history of the planet would go against his instincts such that he would, once having the enemy on the run, stop and go back? When you have the enemy on the run, you press your advantage. Now, Patroclus agrees to Achilles' irrational command. Okay, when I have them driven out of the gates and running, then I'll stop and come back. But in the actual event, when he goes out there and he has them on the run, he does what every sane warrior would do. He follows his military instincts and presses the advantage. And we're told that by the end of book 16, he almost captures the city, and would have if Apollo had not stopped him. So Achilles is asking Patroclus to do what he would never do himself. Would Achilles ever get the enemy on the run and then stop? I think not. He's a better warrior than that. And yet he asks Patroclus to do that. He's lost his mind. From book 9 on, Achilles has lost his mind. He is, and I mean that literally, he is unsound of mind. He is so bitter and so angry at Agamemnon now, and then after book 16 at Hector, he's so bitter and angry that he cannot let go. All right, so here's the problem. Achilles can't be the hero, number one, because there's no hero in a tragedy, and number two, he's an utter failure. He's lost his mind. Now, Hector, and by the way, look at the other things that Achilles says later on. Achilles, when he comes back into battle after Hector has killed Patroclus, he's so angry that he wants to kill Hector for the death of Patroclus, refusing to acknowledge that it's his own fault that Patroclus died. If Achilles had gone back into the battle after Book 9, when Agamemnon made a public and reasonable restitution, Patroclus would never have died. But Achilles never acknowledges that, except for one place, which I'll get to in a second. He is so crazy that in Book 21, when Achilles is back in the battle, he encounters a young man named Lycaon, whom Achilles had captured two weeks earlier, and allowed himself to be merciful and ransom Lycaon. But now he encounters Lycaon again, who had escaped from slavery, comes back into battle, and again encounters Achilles. And Lycaon goes, "I can't believe my bad luck. I run into you again." And Achilles says, "Don't ask me for mercy. Before Patroclus died, I could have been merciful, but now nobody, especially the sons of Priam, will escape my wrath." And in Book 22, when he finally encounters Hector, he says, "If I could," when he has Hector actually down and dying, he says, "If I could, I would hack your flesh away and devour it. I wish only that my spirit and fury would drive me to hack your meat away and eat it raw for the things you've done to me." Yeah, which he himself caused, but he doesn't acknowledge that. So even killing Hector doesn't satisfy his insanely bitter anger, and he drags Hector's body around the battle plane in an attempt to foul and dishonor it further. Now, every army would want to dishonor the body of a fallen warrior, but Achilles has gone well beyond that, and even the gods acknowledge this when they stop him in Book 24. Now, Hector is not a greater warrior than Achilles. I acknowledge that, but he's more balanced. He's more like Odysseus, whom the Greeks themselves said is the better man. In Book 6, he shows piety to the gods. He shows filial reverence to the old women of Troy. He shows kindness to Helen and tender love toward his wife and his son. He's a better, more balanced, more sane man.
Thank you, Wes. So, Matt, it is your turn to respond. You have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. There's a lot of interpretation in there, Wes. Not a lot of what the text actually says, but that's fine. I mean, for example, I didn't say that Hector was a coward. Hector said that Hector was a coward. Not I, Hector. But nonetheless, I also heard more of not why Hector's the greater hero, but why Achilles is not the greater hero. So I don't know. I mean, that's fine. Hector's a coward. He says so himself. The definition that a hero is one who succeeds clearly fits with Achilles, not with Hector, since Hector doesn't succeed. He dies, and Achilles does succeed. He kills Hector. Also, the idea that Odysseus is the greater hero, that's debatable. In Plato's Hippias Minor, there's a dialogue there in which they discuss who's the greater hero, Achilles or Odysseus. Socrates concludes that is Odysseus, but that's a shock to the people there. So it's not necessarily the Greek view that Odysseus was the greater hero than Achilles. Nonetheless, Achilles is the greater hero because he's the greatest warrior, because he's the most pious warrior, because he's the most loved warrior, because he's the most just warrior, and because he's the most wise warrior. He's the wisest warrior. He's the greatest warrior. I don't even know why I would have to argue this. Apparently I do, but it's not even arguable. The entire epic sings the praises of Achilles, that he's the greatest warrior on the battlefield. In fact, there are scenes in the epic where it says, now that Achilles is off the battlefield, Ajax is the new greatest warrior. So he's clearly the greatest warrior. Hector himself admits it. He is the most pious warrior. He obeys the gods every single time. In the scene with Agamemnon in Book 1, when he reaches for his sword to kill Agamemnon in defense of the Greek heroes and their way of life, I'm still going to maintain that point. Athena stops him. He immediately obeys. Doesn't even finish taking the sword out. She doesn't even say his name twice like the angel did to Abraham. Boom, he just stops. When Athena and Thetis tell him to withdraw from the battle until Zeus allows him to return, he does. And when Agamemnon makes his pitiful plea in Book 9, Achilles does not return because Zeus has not yet said that he could. When Athena and Thetis then come and tell him he can return after the death of Patroclus, he does. At that point, when the gods tell him that he can return, that's when he does return. And then when Hermes tells him to return Hector's body and accept the exchange gifts from Priam, he does. He's the most pious warrior, always obeys the gods. He's the most loved warrior. When Patroclus dies, Menelaus and Ajax go to defend Patroclus's naked body while people are going to tell Achilles what happened. Patroclus' naked body, Hector has stripped the armor. His naked body is lying there. Menelaus and Ajax go to defend it. Menelaus says to Ajax, let's rescue his body for Achilles. They are risking their lives to save the naked body of Patroclus, not for Patroclus's sake, though I'm sure that's part of it, but for Achilles' sake. And this is before Achilles has returned. When most readers today would think that moment in time in the book, when most readers today would think that the other Achaeans should most hate Achilles, they're actually, because of his so-called abandonment of the Greek warriors Menelaus and Ajax are offering their greatest expression of love for him, sacrificing their lives to get something for him. He's the most loved warrior. He's the most just warrior. Achilles fights for what is right, and he recognizes those things that are of the greatest importance. He's like those guys in the story of the Monuments Men, right? This group of heroes, they go into Nazi territory during World War II to rescue great art before it can be used or destroyed by the Nazis. They risk their lives and the lives of those around them to save the art that will allow culture to continue beyond them. This is what Achilles is fighting for in that moment when Agamemnon is trying to overturn the entire way of the warrior code for the Greeks. He's trying to overturn that entire system. That's what Achilles is standing up for, so that can continue as part of the Greek way of life. That's what Achilles is fighting for, against Agamemnon and his assumption of the authority that he does not have. And then finally, he's the most wise warrior. Achilles can obey the gods even when the commands of the gods are seemingly at odds with one another. Again, after Patroclus's death, Athena comes to him and says, now it is time to return. Go back out into the battle. But Thetis comes and says, you can return, but not yet. You need to wait for one more thing. I need to get you new armor because Hector has yours. Hector stole your armor off of Patroclus's body. And then she has to go get some new armor made by Hephaestus, right? So in that moment, he has two commands from the gods, one saying go and one saying wait. What does Achilles do? He steps out onto the battlement. This huge bright glow comes up from behind him, and he lets out this huge roar. And in that roar, it tells us that the entire Trojan army was terrified. Actually, it's just like John chapter 18, verse 6, right? Christ is in the garden praying. The Roman soldiers come and he says, whom do you seek? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And the book tells us, and the Roman soldiers collapsed. And then he says, they get up and he says again, whom do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. They collapse, right? In that moment, when Achilles steps out into the battlement and lets out this massive roar with the glow behind him, it tells us the entire Trojan army and the Greeks were terrified, and that 12 Trojan warriors died of fright right there on the spot. In that moment, Achilles, in his wisdom, was able to both obey Athena by returning to the battle and obey his mother by waiting for the armor, and then before he could return completely into the army or into the battle, right? So you have this picture of Achilles as the greatest warrior, the most pious warrior, the most loved warrior, the most just warrior, and the wisest warrior. With Hector, you get his self-admitted cowardice. He's a complete lack of success, really. I mean, he has this Aristeia, but that Aristeia exists solely for the purpose of Achilles getting even more glory when he finally defeats Hector. You get Hector himself admitting in book 22 that he ruined his own people by the decisions that he made, specifically by not heeding the wise counsel of Polydamas. Again, going back to his pride and his arrogance. So what you get is a Hector who is cowardly and really in almost every case a failure. In fact, he isn't even the one that kills Patroclus, although we tend to talk like that in just common discussion of it. But in the text, it tells us that Apollo delivered the death blow to Patroclus, and then the brave and mighty Hector comes along to a dying man and then just gives him one more stab. Not even one, I mean, he's already dying. He just gives him an extra stab just so that he could take credit for it. Patroclus calls him out on it. In his last breath, Patroclus mocks Hector for not even being able to kill him. And then Hector waits till Patroclus dies and then talks smack to him, to his dead body. It's great. Go, Hector.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, so we have I want to do a brief, I want to keep this to an hour, and I want to leave some time for Q&A. So a brief rebuttal period for Wes and then Matt, and then you'll be able to make your closing statements, and then we'll poll the audience. So Wes, rebuttal.
How much time do I have?
I had said 3. Let's make it a strict 3.
All right. First of all, I'm glad Matt brought up the end of book 16. People trash Hector because he talks smack to Patroclus as he lies there. But remember what happened just a few moments before. Patroclus had almost taken the city of Troy until Apollo stopped him. And what is Hector thinking at that moment? Remember back in book 6 when he talked to the old women of the city, he talked to his mother, he talked to Helen, he talked to his wife and his son, and now he sees them about to die, being taken slaves or slaughtered or thrown from the battlements. And at the last minute, for some unaccountable reason, suddenly Patroclus stops. Now, I don't know whether Hector could have seen Apollo stop smacking Patroclus or not. But imagine the relief that Hector feels. Of course, he's going to do what a warrior does and press the advantage and take every opportunity to finish off Patroclus. It doesn't matter that he's not the first one to kill him. He's ending the threat to his family and his city. Which brings us to another question. Who is more like Jesus, the man who lays down his life for his friends and his family? Achilles is fighting for glory. Hector's fighting for people, for his family, for his friends, for his city. Who succeeds? Matt said that who's the success in the story? Hector dies. Of course Hector dies. Achilles is going to die too. They both die, but Hector is the one who maintains the balance, who fights for his family, for his city, who shows love. Achilles is the one who loses his mind and refuses to act like a sane person, which brings us to book 9. Matt said that Achilles refused the offer of Agamemnon because it wasn't time for him to go back into battle yet because Zeus hadn't said so. There's no indication in book 9 that is the case. Who ruined his own people? The first line of the Iliad tells us that Achilles brought on devastation because of his anger. Who's the greater warrior? I have granted that Achilles is the greater warrior. In the narrow field of military prowess, Achilles is greater, no doubt about it. Hector is the greater man because of the broad balance of things that I've already argued fairly successfully, I'd like to think. Piety, Hector is the one in book 6 who goes in the city and urges the old women of the city to pray to Athena for victory. He's the one who shows piety to the gods and to his family and to the city. Achilles shows piety just because he wants to succeed. The most loved, I don't think Achilles is more loved than Hector is. Achilles' words at the beginning of book 18, Matt keeps saying that Hector said, I'm a coward. At the beginning of book 18, Achilles, when he finally hears word that Patroclus died, he says, bitterness is a terrible thing. It fills a man's heart like smoke. And here I sat, a useless weight on the land, and was no help, was no light of help to Patroclus. He admits that he was utterly ineffectual, and he is finally confessing that he cost Patroclus's life. Now he doesn't act on that because he goes on and slaughters Hector mercilessly, blaming Hector for the death of Patroclus eventually. How about this? In Dante's Divine Comedy, where is Hector? In limbo. Where is Achilles? Lower down, suffering from lust. Not because he was particularly lustful for women, but because he was a prey to passion, and Hector wasn't.
Okay, Matt, 3 minutes to respond.
What? I can't even take seriously an appeal to Dante. Good. Okay. Okay. All right. Whatever. I'll let you have it. Dante said that. That's true. Okay. Look, Hector Hector admits his cowardice. Hector admits his ruining the city. He lacks piety in the sense that he rejects the wise counsel of Polydamas. He rejects the interpretation of bird signs and the gods who give them. He reduces Zeus's support to support of an ideology. He's the preeminent ideologue in the story, right? And at the time that all of that is happening, you have Achilles not fighting for glory, but fighting. Look, here there's 3 stages of the war, right? The first stage of the war is we are fighting for Helen. But as soon as the one-on-one battle happens with Paris and Menelaus, that battle has been won. Helen is theirs, right? So from that moment on, all the way till the death of Patroclus, the entire battle is being fought by the warriors for the sake of the transgression in that pact. And then for them, their own personal glory. Achilles isn't even a part of that because he's not interested in the glory that would come from it. And then when Patroclus dies, which Zeus tells us in book 8 before the embassy. So sure, it's not in book 9, but in book 8, Zeus tells us that Achilles will not be allowed to return to the battle until Patroclus dies. That when Patroclus dies, now the battle becomes the rest of the battle from that point forward becomes about defending the friend, right? The lost loved one. So you have this fighting on behalf of Eros for a woman, and then you have this fighting on behalf of Kleos, and then you have this fighting on behalf of Eros for a friend. And it is at those 2 ends where Achilles is involved when it comes to fighting on behalf of the relationships and the friends. In that middle part, when it's actually about glory, Achilles has removed himself from the battle over that because of this other more important battle about the Greek way of life. You're still muted.
Okay, so you have closing statements each, and then the poll will crowd. So this is your last chance to say something to sway the roaring crowd who are eager to, who are perhaps undecided, perhaps not, but your last chance. So is there a volunteer who wants to close first?
Yep, I'll go. I'll give Matt the last one. Yeah. All right. First of all, let this stand for a number of arguments Matt has made. Matt keeps saying that Hector calls himself a coward. When Hector calls himself a coward, he's not giving a definitive judgment about himself any more than Achilles is when he says, "I'm a useless dead weight on the land." And I think when Achilles says that, he's acknowledging that he's done that he's responsible for Patroclus. In the same way, Hector acknowledges that there's fear involved. But look at how Matt's argument is undermined by the very next argument that Matt made. He says he refuses the counsel of Polydamas and other people. Hector refuses counsel most often because he wants to go out and fight. This is the action of a coward? I don't think so. Zeus's judgment in book 8 that Matt referred to is like God's judgments. They're not things that we are privy to. Achilles should have accepted, regardless of Zeus's eternal judgments, whatever they are, Achilles should have accepted a reasonable offer by Agamemnon in book 9, which he said he wanted in book 1. I want to also suggest that Matt has not responded properly yet to the argument that Achilles has become unbalanced, and he himself is the one who has caused the destruction of so many of his people, because that's what the opening line of the Iliad says. This is a tragedy, and it's Achilles' tragedy. It's not Hector's. Achilles has failed, not succeeded in the Iliad. He's lost his mind. So in the context of outside the Iliad, I grant that Achilles is the greater warrior in that narrow band of what we can talk about. But within the context of the Iliad, Hector is a better, more balanced, more sane, more family-oriented, more Christ-like man. Finally, I appeal to Dante once more, because I don't just go back to the text. I look at all the intervening voices in between, the fathers like Dante. And I think Matt can appreciate what I'm saying there. Here I stand, I can do no other.
You can. No, you can do something else.
Okay,
Um,
Matt, 2 minutes rebuttal, or sorry, closing statements.
Okay, I think Wes brings up a fair point. I have not responded to the argument that Achilles is unbalanced. I didn't think he was serious. I thought that was a joke because it's clearly not the case. The book opens with a reference to the rage of Achilles, and it would be an improper reading of the text to define that rage as some sort of human anger or human wrath. This is a divine rage, a kind of righteous indignation, and Homer is not a consequentialist. I mean, people are consequentialists, but Homer is not a consequentialist. Homer is simply describing the fact that divine wrath or rage occurred, and that things happened, but not
Destroy
that
his own
the
people.
fact that these bad things happened make this thing bad. That's a kind of inappropriate consequentialism. The Odyssey, if we're going to make an appeal to outside sources, and I'm okay with that. I'm surprised it's Dante, but if we're going to make an appeal to outside sources, then the Odyssey is the appropriate place to turn, being that it was written by the same person. If we want to get the mind of Homer on this, I mean, unless you're one of those crazy people that don't believe Homer wrote both epics, but nonetheless, in the Odyssey, it tells us that it describes Achilles' funeral in book 24 of the Odyssey. And in book 24 of the Odyssey, the funeral that was held for Achilles is the greatest funeral ever described on behalf of any Greek warrior. All of the nymphs were there. All 9 muses showed up in order to sing his praises, which probably is the Iliad. It's describing the writing of the Iliad in that moment, right? All 9 muses are there to sing his praises. The funeral itself lasts 17 days, and then on the 18th day they bury him. Hector doesn't even get that much time. In fact, Hector, the time that Hector gets, he gets because Achilles is gracious enough to grant it to him. But he grants exactly what Priam asks, right? So I think Homer continues to show us that Achilles was the great warrior in both the Iliad and in the Odyssey.
Okay,
Amen.
so it is time for the audience to vote and democracy to decide who is the greatest warrior. So let's see here. There we go. The polling is open, so go ahead and I'm seeing him come in. Oh my goodness, they're neck and neck coming in. I'm seeing like I don't think you all can see the poll actually come in. Whoa, it's closer than, yeah, okay. 76% participation, 77, 80. I'm not going to say who's pulling ahead here. Few more start coming in. Okay, so most people have voted, and the answer is Hector with 61%, and Achilles with 39%. But you know, that it's well argumented, both of you. That's I don't know. Okay, so the other poll. Okay, let me push end poll here. So 61, let me just say that real quick. Okay. And I want to know, let me go ahead and share results. There we go. I want to know how many of you changed. So I should have another poll here. Okay, here we go. Next one is, did any of you change? There's some yeses.
Yeah, that second poll is distressing though, but it looks like I can't take any credit whatsoever.
Well, they're all stubborn like Hector,
No.
refusing to take advice.
Given the way things were coming in, Matt, I do believe you swayed people in your direction. So, okay, I will. Okay, 5 more seconds to vote. And done. Okay, so I am honestly surprised to see that 23% actually changed their vote. I was thinking it was going to be really low. So that's in terms of changing, because people had such strong opinions. So I didn't create a poll for this. Let's see, do they allow me? Yeah. But in the chat box, which way did you change? So for those who changed, only those who changed, tell us who you changed. So Matt did a great job, but I'm still Team Hector. To Achilles, okay. Achilles, yeah. Neutral to pro Hector. Change to Achilles. So Hector won the day, but Matt, you convinced more people to move. In other words, Achilles was losing, was the more of a minority vote coming in. So you did sway people. So if we have a few more of these debates, maybe we can start swaying things more and more. Well, thank you both so much. We do have a few questions, and we're a little past 6, so we're a little longer than where we were hoping, but I wanted to get a few of these. Robin Douglas asked, do you both agree on the definition of a hero? What is the definition? Matt or Wes, either one. Do you agree? First of all, what's the definition of a hero, Wes?
That's a really good question. Matt, what do you say?
A hero is anyone who behaves like Achilles or Odysseus.
I love Ian says, my CC class has struggled over this definition for 4 years. I love it. That's good. Good conversations then. Wes, what's the definition of a hero if you differ unless you agree with Matt?
Well, Achilles is he's the definitive warrior hero for the ancient Greeks. I think Odysseus is a hero for a different reason. I think Odysseus, he was seen by the Greeks as a hero because he's the consummate ideal man, well balanced brain and brawn and so on. So yeah, a hero is someone who upholds the ideals of his people in a particularly significant way, such that stories are going to be told about him later on. Okay. So I want to go move on to a few other questions here to move through them faster, but thanks so much. I think that the CC class is going to need to spend another 4 years. So Nancy Dayton asks, assuming that piety is an essential aspect of a hero, so getting back to hero a little bit here, who grew more in piety over the course of the story? Of the Iliad?
Of the Iliad.
Relative to each other, the Achilles and Hector?
Yeah. I think that's what she was asking. And yeah, let's say that Hector versus Achilles in the story of the Iliad, who grew more in piety?
I don't think Achilles grows in piety because I think Achilles is the ideal type from Homer from the beginning. So I don't really see him like I don't think the epic should be read like a novel where you have like character development. And so then he's just this picture of an ideal hero with respect to justice and courage, and that just carries through beginning to end. But I guess if it relative to Hector, he grows because Hector devolves. Hector starts out as a seemingly pious man, and then he just becomes this monster over time, and he gets worse and worse and more he goes more and more against the gods, the will of the gods.
I'm reading through these questions, and actually most of the questions have to do with hero. So
something else needs to be said here. I would like to agree with Matt. He's making it hard to, because one of the things that I agree with very much is that there's not character development as you would have in a modern novel. Achilles is who he is, Hector is who he is, Patroclus is who he is. There's something else going on in this. Achilles is he's the great Greek hero, and the reason, and when I say I want to agree with Matt, I actually do think he's the greater Greek hero. I think in the story of the Iliad, he's a failure because it's a tragedy. I mean, that's the definition of a tragedy. He's failed somehow, but the tragedy is based on the fact that he is otherwise a great man. But here's the problem. Achilles is a great man. He's the great Greek hero because he is the epitome of the pursuit of glory, of kleos, which is what the Greeks were all about, especially in the Iliad. But Matt himself brought up the Odyssey. What he didn't bring up is that in book 11 of the Odyssey, Odysseus sees Achilles in Hades, and Achilles unsays everything that makes him a great hero. He says, it's not good to be down here in hell. I would rather be a slave following the plow of another man up in the land of living than to be a king down here in Hades. In other words, he's unsaying what he had said before. He was willing to die young for the sake of great glory. But now in hell, in the Odyssey book 11, he says, it's not worth it. I was wrong. What is Homer doing there? I still think that Achilles is the greatest hero, but he's a great hero based on a perception of glory that Homer undermines somehow in book 11 of the Odyssey, when Achilles unsays it all. He says, no, I'd rather be a slave with no glory. I should have taken the other fork in the road. I should have lived a long life as a nobody in the land of the living. That's really weird.
Book 11 was written by a different Homer. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
One of those crazies, huh? Yeah. So Aaron asks, curious to hear Matt and Wes's thoughts. Do either of them think that our modern post-Christian worldview influences the perspective on what makes a hero? So in other words, so many of these questions are coming around from the hero question. How much has that changed? Would it be fair to say that according to the ancient Greek standards, Achilles was the greater hero, but according to the modern standards, Hector would be considered the greater hero? So did Hector win because of our modern lens? Wes, you should respond to that.
Well, first of all, Hector is, to us moderns, Hector, I think, is more likable. He's a family guy and all that kind of stuff. And we have a harder understanding, a very, very alien mindset that was the ancient Greeks about the pursuit of glory and what real, masculine heroism is and so on. So yeah, that often colors. That's why we try and go back and we try and see what, in Homer's own terms, who's the greater hero. And it's also why we try and look at, I brought up Dante and stuff, but I mean, it really is valuable to look at what other people in the ancient world before the Enlightenment, before the undoing of everything that made Old Western culture. It's valuable to see what other people in history have said about Homer as a balance to our modern, individualist, particularist, sentimentalist, non-metaphysical, materialist worldview, where we're left with nothing but the sentiment of human affection. Human affection is not bad, but it becomes a monster when it exists on its own with no guidance from a metaphysical realm that the ancients believed in and the modern world does not. So yeah, our judgments are colored, but there are ways to try to escape that.
What did Plutarch or the other Roman historians think of Hector or Achilles, or do they talk about it much?
I don't know, Matt. I don't know if Plutarch talked about it. To the Romans, I don't think talked in terms of that comparison. And I think clearly,
lives
to the extent that the Romans talked about the ancient heroes, they would have certainly talked about Achilles. He's the consummate Greek hero.
I think I want to reiterate what you just said, Wes, because I actually agree with you that. Even though earlier it made it sound like I didn't, but I actually do agree with you that we need to read these texts in their own context, but also in the context of the tradition that brought them to us, right? So these texts didn't just arrive in our hands to 2,600 years later, you know, transported by time here, right? But they're like oaks growing up, an entire forest of oaks surrounded by other oaks that are all affecting and coloring them and being colored by them. So to read the Iliad and the Odyssey in the light of Dante is worth doing, because it came to us through that tradition, right? As alongside of that. But I laugh at Dante particularly because Dante, like Virgil, is intentionally writing his story from an Italian or Roman perspective, right? So he's intentionally making the Greeks the bad guys and the Trojans and the Romans the good guys, because there's a specific kind of story he's telling, right? So he's not even trying necessarily to be fair to Achilles, but he's trying to tell Achilles' story from the perspective of that people, that audience, right? So, you know, that's all. That's my only reason for laughing at Dante.
Although I would point out, Dante does something interesting when he has Ulysses, because Ulysses also is looked down on by the Romans because he was the great trickster who caused the fall of the Greeks, who were the ancestors of the Romans. And yet, in the story about Ulysses deeper down in hell, the way Dante has Ulysses tell a story, there's nothing but dignity and nobility and charm. There's nothing negative except that he's in hell. But Dante, I think Dante clearly shows his love for Odysseus. He's got to put him in hell because that's the Italian tradition, but he personally I think, likes him.
Yeah, that's good.
So he is colored by his culture. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think that I don't know if this is answering that question that you asked, Daniel, exactly, but the modern, I don't know if this is a modern mind thing or just a human thing, right? But the the saying, right, that what is the saying about first impressions, right? It's hard to overcome a bad first impression.
Yeah.
I think something like that happens to us when we read the Iliad, because when we encounter the Iliad, for whatever reason, we encounter Achilles on this scene, and we see it as kind of a negative moment, right? Especially in our first or second reading, we see it as a kind of this negative moment where, I mean, on the social media build up to this, I mean, there are a lot of comments about Achilles being a crybaby, right? We get that first impression of Achilles as a crybaby, and then everything that happens after that gets interpreted in light of that initial first impression. But the flip of that happens with Hector, right? The first impression, it's not really the first, but one of the first impressions we get of Hector is that scene in book 6 with his family, right? So he has that moment with his wife and he has that moment with his son, and it's just such a touching and intimate and very, very human moment, right? You can't help but see the humanity of Hector in that moment. And then that makes us fall in love with Hector, and then everything that he does after that gets interpreted in light of it. Even it's I think, Wes, you told me this story a long time ago, probably everybody here has heard it, but that idea that there was some sort of like a supernova or something that happened in the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Age mind was incapable of interpreting what a supernova was, because for them the heavens were static, right? Or the heavens were perfect, unchanging. So when that happened, they couldn't even write anything about it because they had no idea what to say, how to even describe it. And I think that kind of happens for us, right? Like we read right over these negative passages of Hector and these positive passages of Achilles because they don't fit with our now conceived notions based on those first impressions. And so we miss a lot of really, really kind of clear, obvious stuff, right? Like Hector saying, we've been cowards, that's why this is happening, right? Or like Hector saying at the end, and I do agree with you that he's saying that kind of in the same vein that Achilles says what he says about, you know, the Patroclus situation. But he says that, and then he says this other thing about how he caused the ruin by not obeying the advice of Polydamas. And but we don't even have compartments to put those lines into because they don't fit that first impression that we have. So it's like Homer's giving us this something where you have Hector way up here. I think he's going like this, but we can't see it. So we just keep him going like this. And then he gives us Achilles way down here, and he's going like this, but we can't see it, right? We just see him here, I think.
No, I think that's a really good point. I'm not sure I agree with all the details, but in general, I agree with what you're saying. And it's more than probably just I think it is that initial impression, and it's also just like the vast gulf between our culture and theirs. Just illustrated by something as simple as Achilles being a crybaby because he weeps. That's just a cultural difference. The men were weeping all the time, and they're these masculine men beyond masculinity. For them, crying was no big deal. It's not a sign of weakness at all. But because in our culture it's taken that way, we misread it, and then that thing goes on. And I think the thing about Hector calling himself a coward, you're right to point that out, and that misleads us too. I don't think Hector is making a definitive judgment where we're cowards all the time. I think he's saying we've been fearful, let's stop, and I think they do stop. But we miss that too for the reason you're saying. We see something, and then that suddenly colors everything we read the rest of through the rest of the story.
Right. Plus, that book 6 scene could be a Hallmark. It's a Hallmark. You can make a Hallmark movie about Hector, but not about Achilles. And so I think that says something. How predictable they are. Well, there is a certain predictability there. Well, there were more questions, some really great questions. But I want to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you so much, Matt and Wes, for participating in this. This was a lot of fun. The buildup was a lot of fun. The debate was a lot of fun, and the questions and the comments were fantastic. So thank you so much. And I encourage, so everyone who's registered here will be getting some emails about the Great Books Challenge. If you're not reading the Iliad, it's a very leisurely pace. Meant for adults to go through basically reading the Iliad and the Odyssey over a year. The deadline's August 1st, 2022. So there's plenty of time to get in. You can now read anew. You can pick up Wes's copy, which the full Iliad, the manuscript was just given to us this Monday. So now we're in editing mode so that we can send it to the printers soon. But you can read Wes's copy or any other copy of the Iliad. And there's no required edition for the challenge, but read the Iliad, read the Odyssey, read them aloud as much as you can, and I'll see you in August for a read aloud that will stream of the Odyssey on August 1st. So thank you so much for joining, and go ahead.
Can I just share one thing? I was asked to share one thing on the screen.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you're a co-host, so go right ahead. Okay.
I was asked to show this on the grounds that I most certainly won. Can you guys see that? That's me dragging Wes's body behind my chariot after his defeat. Do you see that?
I am not seeing it because I think I'm I don't know if it's because I'm the host. There it is.
I have nothing to come back to that with. Nothing at all.
Well done. Listen, thank you so much. I mean, for all of those people, 160 plus people here live, for all those people that were here live, thank you for joining us. Yes. I had a great time. Wes, thanks for, letting me do this with you. Daniel, thanks for you and Cooper and you guys for inviting me. I had such a blast. It was so much fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. This is great. And Matt, it's always good to argue with you.
Have a wonderful evening and go read Homer.
Yes, read Homer.